Scripture reading this morning will come from Jeremiah chapter 50, verses 25 and 26. Jeremiah 50, 25 and 26. The Lord has opened his arsenal and brought out the weapons of his wrath. For the sovereign Lord Almighty has work to do in the land of the Babylonians. Come against her from afar, break open her granaries, pile her up like heaps of grain, completely destroy her, and leave her no remnant.
Yesterday, we celebrated 250 years of freedom in this country. And many of us probably celebrated by shooting fireworks. Some of us probably grilled. Some of us probably took long naps. Some of us probably went out into our safes, got out our guns, celebrated freedom by unloading some rounds at a target, enjoying our arsenal. And if you look back in history, throughout all of history, human history, not just American history, battles and wars have been won because of great weapons and the inventions of certain weapons and technology. Not just because of that, of course, there's great leadership and direction, but a lot of that help was from certain weapons. One day I was thinking, reading through Scripture, this is a long time ago, and I came across this passage in Jeremiah. And most English translations says Armory, but there was one English translation that said his arsenal. And it was said in such a way that I thought, a lot of humans have their own arsenal. They have their own room dedicated to weapons they like, and a lot of us will collect guns. I personally like bow and arrows, swords. I like a lot of the ancient weapons just to collect. But have you ever thought about what's in God's armory? What God has in his arsenal? Jeremiah talks about it in Jeremiah 50 and verses 25 to 26, and it says, let God open up his arsenal, his armory. The word there, I believe the Hebrew word is osar. It just means storehouse or home, something to store a place, to store something of great value or of great might. And in the context of Jeremiah 50, it is a storehouse of weapons. God, when he sees something happening and there is a battle raging, Jeremiah says he goes to his armory and he opens up his safe, using our terminology. And he says, which one? Have you ever wondered exactly what is in God's safe or his arsenal? If you look throughout history, there are great weapons of mass destruction that have been devised and put together by man. You've got the famous AK-47, the assault rifle, back in the 1900s by I believe the Soviet Union, and it's still being used today. You've got back in World War II, the atomic bomb, also known as Little Boy. I want to read you, a lot of us are very familiar with this, but just to read the numbers. The atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, killed 70,000 people instantaneously, with tens of thousands more succumbing to radiation sickness over subsequent months and years. The explosion yield of Little Boy, the atomic bomb, dropped on Hiroshima was the equivalent of about 15 kilotons of TNT. A few years later, in 1961, the Soviet TSAR bomba was tested on October 30th, 1961, and its destruction was the equivalent of 50 megatons of TNT, which is roughly 1,570 times more than Little Boy. You've got other weapons of mass destruction like Maximum machine guns. It was a recoil-operated, belt-fed, water-cooled machine gun that fired more than 500 rounds per minute at an effective range of more than 2,000 yards. That's a terrifying weapon. All the way back into the ancient times of Greece, you have what's called Greek fire. We know it as napalm. It was actually mastered by the Greeks, and we still have no idea, even today, how they were able to use this type of weaponry. It was seen as almost like dragon fire to those that were receiving it from the Greeks, and we even use it today. But you know what? If you turn over to Psalm 2, and it's applicable even today, I want to read something to you that was written by the psalmist a long time ago. And it says in verse 1, "Why are the nations in an uproar, and the people devising a vain thing? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us tear their fetters apart and cast away their cords from us." Really, what the psalmist is saying and putting it in our terms, why are the nations of this world ganging up against God, saying, let's try and overthrow Jehovah? Let's put all of our weapons together. Let's put all of our army, our cavalry, everything together, our chariots, our horses, our power, and let's tear the bonds away that God has us in. You know what God's response is to this? Look at verse 4. "He who sits in the heavens laughs." How terrifying is that? "The Lord scoffs at them," he continues. "Then he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury, saying, But as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain." God looks at all of the nations from the ancient days, even to today. With the weapons that we have been able to produce, he looks at mankind when mankind has the atomic bomb, the Soviet bomb, the Greek fire, napalm, all of these weapons. And we say, let's see if we can tear down God's kingdom. And God just looks at us and laughs at us and then says, okay, now that I'm done belly laughing on my throne, let me go to my arsenal, Jeremiah chapter 50, and see what I have in store. What I want to do is consider the weaponry of God. We read about one of those first ones in the book of Job. Job 38, verses 22 to 23. God has an army of snow and hail. You know, when we think of weapons, our minds usually go to guns, bombs, blades. God doesn't really use a lot of that kind of stuff. He uses his creation. And look what Job says. "Have you entered the storehouse of the snow? Or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of distress, for the day of war and battle?" This is when God is talking to Job, saying, Job, you want to have a conversation with me about why all these things are happening to you. But before we do that, I've got some questions for you. Have you seen my armory? Have you seen what I have laid up and stored for times of battle? No, you haven't. If you look at throughout history and ask, what is one of the greatest blizzards that has ever taken place? You know, we've had what we call Snowmageddon or Snowvid, I guess, depending on who you talk to. We had a pretty good freeze this past winter, but nothing compares to what happened in Iran in 1972. The deadliest blizzard on record struck Iran in February 1972, killing more than 4,000 people and flattening 200 villages. The storm, which lasted 7 days, dumped up to 26 feet of snow in some areas on a region of northwestern, central, and southeastern Iran, roughly the size of Greece. That's the kind of power that God has just in snow. Now, many of us who have experienced hail, when we hear that hail is coming, we try to park our cars underneath something and say, well, I don't want to have anything to do with the weather that's coming, so we just need to try and protect ourselves. Imagine looking at Jehovah God saying, I'm fixing to take you down. And he says, let me just send some snow their way and we'll see how they like it. Job mentions the power of hail and snow. The destructive power of hail is devastating, and God has created the perfect weapon of war, and He alone can use it. We can't use snow the way God can. You're probably thinking, why on earth is this preacher talking about how God can use snow to destroy people? Bear with me. Bear with me. Look at his second option in his armory. Genesis chapter 7, verses 17 to 22. We don't have time to read all of this passage, but you read about the destruction of the entire world, the flood. God has an armory of water. Besides the flood of Noah, of course, one of the worst floods recorded in history is in China, 1931, called the China floods. This catastrophic event primarily affected the Yangtze River, Yellow River, and Howe River basins, leading to an estimated death toll ranging from 1 million to 4 million people. And the floods were caused by a combination of excessive rainfall and snow melt, resulting in widespread devastation across central and eastern China. Water is incredibly devastating. You know, water is very poetic in nature. It's beautiful, really, and terrifying at the exact same time. It's something that we can't live without, but yet it's one of the most dangerous things known to man. It's something that even if there's just a small leak in your house, it can do hundreds and even thousands of dollars worth of damage. Imagine the entire world flooded with water. It says in Scripture that the fountains of the deep broke forth and the heavens opened up. Humanity was sandwiched by water. And if you look at how all of that actually happened, we don't have time to go into great detail of all of the scientific background of it. But imagine a hot spring on a scale of a planet. You know, have you ever been to hot springs where water will shoot up and it's boiling hot, all the pressure underneath the earth? Imagine the fountains of the deep, the size of the Marianas Trench opening up to lava and magma, and the ocean hitting that water or hitting that lava. That is the destructive power that God has, that He, at His fingertips, when He says, I don't like what's going on, and I need to exact justice and righteousness upon this people. And He says, let me destroy the earth real quick and then bring it back. That's the kind of power God has just with water. Now, we looked at snow, we looked at water. Look at Exodus chapter 14, verse 21. This is in the context of crossing the Red Sea. And you probably think, well, we already talked about water. Look at what the passage says. Verse 21 of Exodus 14. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and Jehovah swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea into dry ground, so the waters were split. God has an arsenal of wind. You know, I'm living in Tennessee for half of my life now. I've seen a lot of tornadoes. We have some tornadoes here. It's mostly water damage here in Texas. It's crazy what Texans will do. They will withstand the flood of Noah, but if they hear that there is just a sign of one snowflake, they have to get all the toilet paper and all the milk in the stores. I don't know what's wrong with Texans, but anyway, in Tennessee, we had a lot of tornadoes. And I remember during tornado season, we were sitting in the living room, and my mother got a phone call from one of the elders' wives at the congregation. But before she even picked up the phone was ringing. And it got very ominous very quickly. We were watching TV, and then everything just got dark. And then it turned this very dark green black. And all of the birds stopped chirping. All of the crickets went silent. Everything just went quiet. And then she picked up the phone, and the elder's wife said, "You need to get over here now." And so we packed up. They were just up the street. They had a storm shelter. And as we waited, we could just hear the howling of the wind. The house was shaking. And when everything passed, it just immediately stopped. And so we got out. Everybody checked to see if everything was good. And the sky was blue. Everything was completely destroyed. Houses were turned upside down. There were just foundations left. And when there was a search party for people who were missing because of the storm of the tornado, I can't even say because of how graphic it was what they found of people, just because of what wind did. God says, "Yeah, I've got that in my storehouse. You think you can mess with me? I've got wind. I've got wind that I can part oceans with and then dry the ground that was underneath it and keep it up for as long as I want." That's how powerful God is. Now, what about, let's see here, an army of creatures? An army of creatures. We got a couple of passages here. I want to first look at Genesis chapter 7 and verse 13. It's not really considered an army, but you see an introduction to what God can do with animals, creatures, his creation, every creeping thing that creepeth on the earth. Chapter 7 and verse 15, "So they came to Noah into the ark by twos of all flesh, in which was the breath of life." Did you catch how Moses wrote this passage through the inspiration of God? So they came to Noah. You know, if I try to go out, I love to go deer hunting. You know how easy it would be to just call the deer and just let them come up to you? Or, you know what, I don't even have to do anything. God will just send the deer my way. That we don't have that kind of power. We can't just talk to animals and have them do everything we tell them to do. And people say, "Well, we can train them." Well, wait a minute. God didn't train these animals. He spoke once. He didn't even have to speak. He just led them to Noah. Now, turn over to 2 Kings chapter 2 and verses 23 to 24. For all those who are bald-headed, this is probably one of your favorite passages here. Okay? Notice what it says. 2 Kings 2, 23 and following. "Then he went up from there to Bethel, and as he was going up by the way, young boys came out from the city and mocked him and said to him, 'Go up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head.' And then he looked behind him and saw them, and he cursed them in the name of Jehovah by the authority of. Then 2 female bears came out of the woods and tore up 42 lads of their number." Now, this is a prophet, and he didn't call them. He just said, "God is going to curse you." And then all of a sudden, these 2 mama bears come out of nowhere and completely devour these men. Now, where do you think those bears came from? You're probably thinking, this is the most peculiar sermon I've ever heard in my entire life. Bear with me. Bear with me. God can speak to any creature he has created and say, "I want you to do exactly what I tell you." And they say, "Just let it be known," and it'll happen. He can have an army of animals absolutely destroy mankind. You know, you read about locusts and the 10 plagues, how it absolutely devastated the economic system of the Egyptians because they went against God and his command. God says, all I've got to do is call my creation and they'll do my bidding. What about fire? Genesis chapter 19, verse 24. I'm going to give you these passages real quick. We don't have time to flip to all of them. Genesis 19, 24. Leviticus chapter 10 and verse 2. You've got Exodus chapter 13 and verse 21. as well as 1 Kings 18:8, God has an army of fire. You know, we know the destruction of fire. In fact, we have quite a few firemen here in our number who are brethren, and I bet you they could tell you all kinds of stories about the destruction of fire. Some of the worst fires recorded, 1871, they occurred in Wisconsin and Michigan, resulting in approximately 800 deaths and the destruction of 16 communities in just 90 minutes. You've got the Great Chicago Fire in 1871. The fire led to the deaths of around 300 people and left over 100,000 homeless, devastating a large portion of Chicago. The Great Hinckley Fire in 1894, this Minnesota fire resulted in over 400 fatalities, highlighting the unpredictable nature of wildfires during that era. And then you've got the Siberian Taiga Fire in 2003. These fires destroyed over 55 million acres of land in just a matter of moments. Now imagine what God can do with that kind of destruction. Well, he's recorded it for us. His army of fire proves his just nature, Genesis 19:24. And Jehovah rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from Jehovah out of heaven. You know, if you looked at where Sodom and Gomorrah might be today, there's like zero trace of it. You've got some idea of where it could be. But because of how destructive Sodom and Gomorrah's downfall was, because of the fire that God used, it turned everything into brimstone and salt. It's some of the most pure brimstone that you can find in the entire world, because that's the kind of fire that God has. You've got Leviticus 10 and verse 2, and fire came out of the presence of Jehovah and consumed them, and they died before Jehovah. And that's talking about Nadab and Abihu when they went against God's commands. So think about this. God has an army of water, snow, hail, wind, fire, animals, and he can use them at any moment and destroy everything if he pleases in a matter of seconds. Now, one of my all-time favorites, we're almost done, all-time favorites is his heavenly host. Out of all of his creation, this one is some of the most fascinating. God has an army of angels. Now, we made mention of this, I believe, last week, just in passing. But I want to show you in detail and give you the passages so you can look this up for yourself. 2 Kings 16 and verse 7, or chapter 6 and verse 17. 2 Kings 6 and verse 17. Horses and chariots are seen, but not heard. Then you go over a chapter 7 and verse 6. Horses and chariots are heard, but not seen. If you look at the scene that's taken place in 2 Kings 6, when the eyes are open, it says it looks like the mountains were engulfed in flames because of the amount of chariots and angels that were standing around them. Then you've got Matthew 26 and verse 53, more than 12 legions of angels. You know, we sing the song, he could have called 10,000 angels. That's nothing. He could have called 12 legions of angels. Do you know how many that is? It says, or do you think I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? This is Jesus talking. Think of the damage that just one angel can do. 2 Kings 19 and verse 35. Now it happened that night that the angel of the Lord went out and struck 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And the men arose early in the morning, and behold, all of them were dead bodies before them. Now, you've got passages like 2 Samuel 24, where it's 70,000. But you know what? This passage in 2 Kings is one of the biggest numbers we have of one angel killing a group of people, 180,000. Now, I am not a math major. I had to do some research on this, okay? For all you number people out there, I think you'll really appreciate this. The damage of the legion of angels is as follows. In one legion, there are about 3,000 to 6,000 soldiers. Because God can have as many as He wants, we're going to round it up to 6,000. In 12 legions, there are at least 72,000 soldiers. That is angels. 72,000 angels. Now remember what one angel did in one night. Okay? 72,000 angels each kill 185,000 people. That's 13,320,000,000 people. Do you know how many people are on the earth recorded right now? The most recent census. Earth's population is roughly 7,753,000,000 people. So if Jesus wanted to appeal to His Father and say, I need 12 legions of angels at least, God says, they're yours, my son. And in a matter of moments, He could kill the earth 2 times over. Just with angels. Now, you're probably wondering still, where's the application in all of this? In Jeremiah 50, it says God has opened up His arsenal. And we have just taken a small glimpse of what is in His arsenal. This isn't the exhaustive list. You know, God has a secret weapon. In fact, it's mentioned throughout all of Scripture. Old Testament, it prophesies about this mysterious weapon. The angels themselves desire to see this weapon. In the New Testament, when Jesus was preaching, people wondered, what is this weapon that He's talking about? And then Paul says, the mystery has been revealed unto us. The secret weapon of God. His secret weapon is you and me. Think about that for a moment. His secret weapon is you and I. It's all of us, the Christians. Now, out of everything that God could use to carry out His will of the kingdom, He chose little old me. He's got snow, He's got hail, He's got fire, He's got over 72,000 angels at His disposal, and yet He chooses you and me. His secret weapon was mentioned at the beginning of time, Genesis 3:15, talking about Jesus the Christ, and through Him He would destroy Satan, and that His seed and her seed would battle, and He would win, Him and His army. Who is Christ's army that would be able to destroy the evil one? It's the Christians. Ephesians chapter 1, verses 3 through 14, this secret weapon was planned even before the foundation of the world. God had a plan for this weapon before He uttered any of the other weapons into existence. And He said, this is going to be the greatest weapon of all time, those who were made in my image. And then you've got Colossians 1:26. He says, that is the mystery which has been hidden from the past ages and generations, but has now been manifested to His saints. Do you know the destructive power that the Christians can have on the world? It's not really destructive. It's more constructive. The effects of His secret weapon, Acts 17:6, they turn the world upside down. Think about this. You've got the Roman Empire, the greatest military group of all time, of their age. You've got the Judaizing teachers that's got the sway of the Roman Empire, and yet they're looking at Christians and saying, every time we try to take them down, 10 more take their place. They're turning the world upside down. What are we going to do about these Christians? And then you've got Romans chapter 8, in verses 31 to 33, it says, if God is for us, who can be against us? Have you ever really just stopped to consider that statement by Paul? If God is on our side, the one that's got hail, rain, fire, angels, creatures, everything is on our side, why are we afraid of what the world can do to us? Now look at the potential of his weapon. We looked at the effects. We have recorded what it can do, but look at the potential that we have. Genesis chapter 11. I want us to turn there together. Genesis chapter 11. And I want us to read the first few verses together. Now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. It came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, this is God's creation. Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they used bricks for stone and they used tar for mortar. They said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven. And let us make for ourselves a name, otherwise we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Now notice God's response to this. The one that has hail, fire, brimstone, all of these things. The Lord came down to see they are one people, or they came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. The Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language, and this is what they began to do, and now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language so they will not understand one another's speech. Do you understand what God just said? He says, when humanity puts their mind to something, nobody can stop them except God. Now imagine God is on our side. Who can stop us? Now, hearing this is, for me personally, is amazing. Knowing that God has that kind of power, and yet He chooses us to go out into all the world, preaching the gospel, making disciples of all nations. When He could use destruction, He could use other creation like every creeping thing. And yet we, like Moses at one time, will sit there and say, who am I? I can't do this. I'm not a good speaker. What am I going to say? I don't have the right material. What if they reject me? First of all, it's not about you, and it's not about me. It's about the one who is for us, God. And if not only God is for us, but we are for God, there is no excuse in the book that we could pull out that God would say, you know, I didn't think about that one. Let me go to my storehouse and see if I can pull one out real quick. He says, no, you are my greatest creation, the church. You were made in my image. I prepared this before the foundation of the world. You are my secret weapon. Now, therefore, go out and make disciples of all nations. Even though God has an arsenal of mass destruction, He is actually a God of great construction. He desires all men to be saved. He wants us to throw out the lifeline and say, He is love. You know, we should know that God is love based off of this. He's got this kind of power, and yet He still doesn't destroy us. He says, I'm going to give you a chance. And guess what? This is your chance. You may be thinking, I didn't know God had that kind of power. I am terrified of God. Well, you know what? It's good to have a healthy dose of fear of God. But you know what? He desires your love and respect. He wants you to stand for Him. And maybe you have not been standing for Him. Maybe you've been standing against Him like the psalmist said in Psalm 2. They band together and say, let us overthrow Jehovah. Maybe you've been trying to overthrow Him for far too long. And like Saul, you've been kicking against the goads. You want to make those things right. Maybe you're like the prophet that was made fun of. Go up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head. And it's pretty discouraging. Spiritually being torn down by the world. But now you have been reminded that God is on your side. and He has an arsenal, and you're a part of it, and you need prayers for strength. Whatever the case may be, I beg and plead that you come now. Together we stand, and as we sing.